Welcome back everyone to Gotcha Interact. Today we're going to be looking at the second half of the 2.4 star rail banners today. This first character we're taking a look at is Jiaoqiu, and the second character on the other side of the banner is Sparkle. Let's go through both of these banners and see whether or not these characters are a good polling option for you. And if you do enjoy the video, go ahead and slap that like and subscribe button and check out the rest of our channel for other videos that might interest you. We do also have a Discord where we hang out and have a lot of fun with our community members in there, so do check it out. Now, onto the video.
The first character, obviously, in this is going to be Jiaoqiu, as was previously stated. And so, looking at Jiaoqiu, we've already made a pre-release. Actually, technically, we've made two of them, looking at a few of his different versions, actually. So if you guys want to go ahead and check out that, you'll probably actually want to check out his most recent one that we've made out of the two. So if you guys do want to know a little bit more about his kit, that's what we're going to do here. That's the idea, and that's what, if the video you want to go see, that's where you should go. But if you want to go ahead and stay for now looking at Sparkle, looking basically at just what she does in a basic sense, we're not going to read through her entire kit like we used to. We're just going to basically talk about what she does in a very basic sense. Basically, her skill is going to be giving a crit damage increase to the character that she uses. So she uses her skill, she'll basically buff a character that she chooses. She'll also give them an action forward to that, and that is based off of her crit damage as well. And then when you actually put this on yourself, it does buff your own crit damage, but the action forward doesn't actually happen to yourself, so that's something specific that might help to know. But her ultimate besides that is going to recover skill points and also bring that to a maximum of 7, which we're going to get to from the talent as well. It basically, as soon as Sparkle's on the battlefield, she's going to have, instead of the 5 skill points that you have, you're going to actually increase that by 2, and that's going to give you a maximum of 7 skill points that you can have whenever Sparkle's on the team. But the ultimate's going to give you 4 skill points back and then grant all of the allies Cypher. The Cyphers is basically for each stack of the damage boost effect provided by her talent, basically, that she gets. She's going to get an additional increase by 10% because of the ultimate, and the actual talent increase that you can get is basically whenever an ally uses a skill point, all the allies' damage in general is going to be increased by 6%, and that lasts for 2 turns and has up to 3 stacks, and that's going to actually come into effect later when we look at her Eidolons as well. But basically, her whole idea in a kit is to use her skill to not only action forward someone, but also give a bunch of crit damage to them. So usually units that have a higher crit rate or just want more crit damage and want a higher damage ceiling, she's an extremely good buffer for that. But never mind that her talent helps extremely well with, never mind maxing out or having the maximum amount of just a higher number of skill points for a lot of teams that are very skill point heavy, which we have plenty of those in the game. She's just extremely helpful for that, and then as well giving just an all ally damage boost from that, and then the ultimate's super helpful, giving back those skill points for those teams.
Now let's quickly look at the light cones on these banners. The first light cone we're going to look at is called Those Many Springs, and this is Jiaoqiu's light cone. Now looking at its ability, we're going to assume this is at super imposition number 1. It states that it will increase the wearer's effect hit rate by 60%, and after the wearer uses a basic attack, skill, or ultimate to attack an enemy target, there's a 60% base chance to inflict unarmored on the target. While in the unarmored state, the enemy target receives 10% increased damage, lasting for 2 turns. If the target is under a DOT state inflicted by the wearer, there's a 60% base chance to upgrade the unarmored state inflicted by the wearer to the cornered state, which additionally increases the damage the enemy target receives by 14%, lasting for 2 turns. During this period, the wearer cannot inflict unarmored on the target.
And now looking over at Earthly Escapade, looking at Sparkle's specific light cone, the superimposition ability states that it increases the wearer's crit damage by 32%. At the start of the battle, the wearer gains Mask, lasting for 3 turns. While the wearer has Mask, the wearer's allies have their crit rate increased by 10% and their crit damage increased by 28%. For every 1 skill point the wearer recovers, including the skill points that exceed the limit, they gain 1 stack of Radiant Flame, and when the wearer has 4 stacks of Radiant Flame, all the stacks are then removed and they gain Mask, lasting for 4 turns.
Now we've come to the part of the video where we're going to ask some questions, and you can kind of apply this to yourself or what your account actually looks like to kind of help you better decide on if the characters in question are actually good for you. So looking at our first question, we ask, do you actually need either of these characters on your account? Essentially, how valuable are they for you? You know, and a different way you can kind of ask this is kind of what elements or even paths or just kind of the roles that the characters fill on your account. What do you actually need in those different departments? Who else maybe do you already have that fills those roles? And so when we look at Jiaoqiu, he is a Nihility fire character. And while we already have a character like Guinaifen, there are a few things to take away and take home with Jiaoqiu that I think is going to make him, in overall, just be a good character. And here's why I say that. In the past several weeks, there had been a lot of changes that, people weren't necessarily happy with. But and one of those big changes was now his DOT is dealing more damage, and it actually kind of got mixed feelings. Another thing was, I think people were upset at the very start when we found out he wasn't an abundance character and instead he was a nihility, because a lot of people just thought, well, he's a chef, okay, he should be a healer for Acheron. And we'll talk about some teams later on, but I actually like this character's design and gameplay and just kit design very well. And part of the reason I actually really like the DOT in the kit, and I think that's going to be very interesting, just because you can upgrade what your Guinaifen's already doing for a DOT team. So I think there's a lot that can be taken away with Jiaoqiu. He kind of seems flexible because of that, because of the DOT in his kit, but also being a nihility character and giving your other characters in general just more ultimate damage through his ultimate and debuffing enemies, which we'll learn later that helps Acheron a lot. And once again, we'll talk about that in the teams. So I think Jiaoqiu is a very interesting character and definitely one you can't really go wrong with, even if he is close to one of your first 5 stars, just because there is a lot of debuffing and just in general helping other characters do more damage. I think that's going to be very good. Now, this being Sparkle's first rerun, we obviously, or most of us know that Sparkle is a pretty insane character. She's arguably one of the best units to have just in terms of value because, well, she's a Harmony unit, and Harmony units are just really, really high value in general for how they play and support the team. Sparkle is insane because she's giving a ton of crit damage based on her crit damage, and then she's also just increasing your attack. She's giving skill points, which is a big, like a massive part of how this game actually functions. So giving a lot of free skill points is a huge plus for a lot of different teams when you think about it. It really, at a certain point, doesn't even matter what team because any team is using skill points, right? So Sparkle's going to feel very comfortable for pretty much all teams out there.
Now looking at the next question we have, which is what types of teams are you trying to build? Now, when looking at this mainly specifically for Jiaoqiu, most of the time you're going to be focusing on Acheron specific teams. And the reason why is because he can inflict Ashen Roast on so many targets so consistently as well. And by doing so, you're going to be a lot easier to stack consistently, getting the stacks for Acheron's ultimate, because her ultimate isn't normally through energy, it's straight up just because of inflicting things on enemies. Now, because of that, that makes, him an extremely good character for her. The issue, I guess, beyond that is that that's really where his strengths really kind of stop. We can talk about Eidolons later once we get to them and talking about different teams that he could get thrown in, but honestly, that's really where he's going to be done with. There's not really too many other teams where you're going to slot him in and say, you know what, this is an extremely good Nihility unit because he doesn't do a lot of DOT damage, so there's not really any reason to go forward so far into that specific team. And, once again, we'll talk about Eidolons later, but there's not really any real reason at E0 to throw him into a, DOT team. So then the question is, okay, so if he's a Nihility unit, doesn't do that, then where does he fit? We originally thought he might be an Abundance character. Obviously, he can't be a Sustain because he doesn't heal. So there's really some weird instances on where he could actually be placed on certain teams. And once again, we just constantly come back to he's got some okay DOT in his kit, but it wasn't exactly what we were hoping for when he came out. So the idea is, what could we do with him? And the idea really seems to be just really only putting him as specifically just the Acheron support. Looking at the next character, looking at Sparkle, also another character that could be easily thrown on an Acheron team is going to be Sparkle. Now, Sparkle is extremely good, like I just said, on an Acheron team. That's really where you're going to see a lot of her at, because Acheron's such an amazing character right now. You're going to see her there a lot of the times, but there are plenty of other teams that you can really use her on. And because of the plethora amount of teams, the Rift already talked about how well she's going to be used on so many different teams. She's like a lot of other Harmony units that are basically just like Ruan Mei and like even Robin. They might have specific teams that they do extremely well in. For instance, Ruan Mei does extremely well in break effect teams, and Robin can, excel a little bit more in specifically looking at follow-up attack teams because of an extra buff that she can give. But overall, these characters can still be pretty good outside of it to a certain extent. And then we come to Sparkle, which it's basically just focusing on buffing all types of damage, as well as mainly focusing on buffing a lot of crit damage. Also with some of her bonus abilities, jumping in and buffing into attack. You know, there probably are people that are saying, well, because she buffs attack in one small part of her kit, therefore she's not going to be good on some of these other, you know, DPS characters, and she's not as useful as May or Robin. And while to an extent that might be true for certain instances, if we look at most of the destruction and hunt characters, most of them, if not all of them besides Blade, are going to be working very well and are going to be okay with a buff to attack. So unless you are trying to put a Blade with Sparkle together, which in my personal opinion isn't really a smart idea anyways, I don't really think that you're going to be doing that in the first place. So really, Sparkle is just a great harmony unit altogether. She's going to work on so many different good teams.
Next, let's ask the question, do you actually need the light cones? And while we did kind of touch on them earlier in the video, just kind of giving you the description on what they do, let's focus in on, is it actually worth it? So when we look at Jiaoqiu's light cone, obviously, now as with like any Star Rail character, any gacha game character for that instance, obviously their weapon that goes with them is their best in slot. Obviously, increasing the effect hit rate is going to be good because I think a big deal with Jiaoqiu, you know, having a lot of effect hit rate even in his own trace in his kit, knowing that one of his best teams is actually with Acheron, it's going to be very important that he's actually, you know, applying his DOT, because not only does that help his personal damage, which has potential, it also helps give Acheron her ultimate back because she wants to see other characters applying debuffs just in general so that she can go on more. It's energy for her. So the higher you do effect hit rate, the better. And therefore, this light cone's amazing for that. Now, because of that, I guess the talk could be brought up that any other character in Nihility that wants the effect hit rate, which honestly is a lot of them, because a lot of them are also DOT characters. If you do want to get this light cone and maybe you're using it on Jiaoqiu, but let's say you're using a different team that doesn't have Jiaoqiu, like a DOT team, where you're wanting to actually keep your Jiaoqiu with your Acheron team. In that sense, I would kind of ask you, well, why aren't you using Jiaoqiu's Lycon on Jiaoqiu? But my point is, you can actually use this on a lot of the DOT characters like Kafka, Black Swan. You could even just use this on Guanifan. Maybe you want to upgrade your Guanifan, but you don't want to pull Jiaoqiu. I can totally see that, and I wouldn't really blame you. I mean, if that's how you want to have fun, you like Guanifan more than Jiaoqiu, then that's fair. This light cone's going to be very good for her because it's increasing her chance to apply burn. And just increasing damage to your, you know, allies by inflicting the unarmored state that's talked about in this light cone, that's obviously a good thing in every team. You're just universally giving more damage. So I think this light cone can be worth it depending on what your account looks like, but if you're not pulling Jiaoqiu and you don't already have maybe a DO team built up or a lot of built up Nihility characters, maybe, you know, it's just, I would say stay away. I would really, at the end of the day, in my personal opinion, I would stay away if you're just not pulling Jiaoqiu. And I think the same thing could be said for Sparkle, just because, once again, that's how the game works. And the characters are going to do very well with their own light cone. So if you're going to pull any light cone, make sure you already have the character. That's just the way I think about it. On the other side of the coin, of kind of the same talk, though, if you already have a different Harmony character, like, I don't know, May, or let's just say you are using your 4-star Harmony characters, this light cone would be okay, but honestly, I really don't know, because you're increasing a lot of crit damage, and then you're increasing crit rate, you know, and crit damage for your other characters, which that part's good, but there's really no merit to increasing a Harmony character's crit damage except Sparkle, because she uses that to further enhance whoever she's buffing their crit damage. So while I could try to argue pulling this light cone for even a different Harmony character, I would still, just like Jiaoqiu and just like really any character, don't pull the light cone unless you are also pulling the character, and pull the character first.
Now we're going to be taking a look at the next section of our summary and looking at the final area, looking at weighing the dangers between the E0 versus looking at Eidolons. That's really the biggest, ticket item, especially looking at, Sparkle's rerun. A lot of people already know that Sparkle, once again, is an extremely good character. Now you're wondering, is it time to grab some Eidolons? Looking at Jiaoqiu's first Eidolon, it states that all allies deal 40% increased damage to enemy targets afflicted with Ashen Roast. Whenever inflicting Ashen Roast on an enemy target via triggering the talent's effect, additionally increases the number of Ashen Roast stacks applied to this time by 1. The second Eidolon states that when an enemy target is afflicted with Ashen Roast, increase the multiplier for the fire DOT dealt by Ashen Roast to this target by 300%. Now, I think that in general, when looking over at this kit and over him as a character, until you get to E2, and we're seeing this pretty recently actually with a lot of new characters coming out, that Hoyoverse is a little bit more forcing us, a little bit to an extent, to get used to getting the E2s for specifically certain characters. You're seeing this big change and push to try to go for that. But I would, maybe just give you guys an idea to really actually look and give him that first Eidolon a good look at. I do think that the extra DOT is a great idea. A DOT teams could be fun, but once again, an E6 Gweniphen could probably still do the same. And, we're going to have to see once actually, we see some testing and whatnot from actual gameplay, whether or not the E2 of a specifically well-built Jiaoqiu for DOT is going to do against an E6 Gweniphen. But personally, I just feel like going after that 4-star, she's already extremely good. I think she just does an extremely good job at DOT anyways. The way that his kit is worked out, it just doesn't seem like a lot of people are too happy about this specific Eidolon. So in my personal opinion, the extra 40% increased damage is already an extremely good buff already for your other allies, because he's already putting Ashen Roast on most enemies anyways, so it's extremely easy to get that. Plus, whenever they are affected, now it's going to be, stacked twice, so adding one on top of that. So I just feel like in general, the idea about increasing stacks as well as giving more damage is going to be better in this specific Eidolon. But now looking at Sparkle, her first Eidolon states that the Cypher effect granted by the ultimate lasts for 1 extra turn. All allies with Cypher have their attack increased by 40%, a little bit more into that attack buff that we see in some of her bonus abilities. Looking at the second Eidolon, it states that every stack of the talent's effect allows allies to additionally ignore 8% of the target defense when dealing damage, and that's every single stack of the talent's effect, which if you remember goes up 3 times, and 8% 3 times is 24%, which means most likely, most of the time, you guys are going to be getting 24% of the target's defense knocked away whenever you're doing attacks for your allies. So it's basically looking at, is it okay to go for the E1, or should you go ahead and take that step to the E2? As we saw with Jiaoqiu, the E1's really as far as you need to go if you really even want to in the first place. I think both of these characters are going to be fine at E0, especially Jiaoqiu and Sparkle. These two specific characters really don't even have to push beyond their specific E0 playstyles. Because of specifically looking at Jiaoqiu, how well he's going to be doing anyways at E0, you could push for the E1, but I don't feel like the E2 is really worth it because you're probably pulling him for an Acheron support anyways. Looking at Sparkle though, I know there's probably 2 different ways, and Rift is going to give his own opinion on this as well. I think that the E1 is just a little bit better in my personal opinion, especially just because of the huge attack increase and the extra, turn effect from the Cypher, the effect that you're getting from the E1. Now, I do understand that 24% defense shred is extremely good, but personally, I just feel like the C1 would be better, and I'm not sure that 180 extra wishes is really worth that extra Eidolon.
I think you have a lot of great points when looking at the Eidolons on these characters. For me, when I look at Jiaoqiu, the E1, yeah, of course, he's very sustainable and usable at E0. I don't think he needs his E1, but honestly, when I take a look at this, it's such a big increase. I mean, 40% more damage, that's a pretty big increase. And so, is it worth it for someone like me? Maybe, possibly, but once again, you don't need it, so don't feel obligated to pull that. But like, there is a lot of value in that, and then also you're getting those Ashen Rose stacks more often. You're getting more of those stacks, which is going to help a lot. I think something very interesting, and just like you stated, Vixen, if you're going to get an Eidolon on Jiaoqiu, just stick with the E1, unless you're a DOT fanatic like myself, and you are just pushing for the most insane, awesome DOT, Kafka, Black Swan, whatever team you're trying to do. I think the E2 could be a lot of fun with Jiaoqiu by increasing that to 300% on his DOT multiplier. I think he would get some pretty good damage, and definitely at that point would be an upgrade to Gweniphen. Not that he wouldn't be an upgrade to Gweniphen at E0, just because he's a 5-star. I think he's already going to do pretty okay in general, but the E2 is definitely going to skyrocket that, and I think that would be a lot of fun. I'm very curious to see. I'm probably going to look up some gameplay of Kafka, Black Swan, and an E2 Jiaoqiu, because I'm very curious personally what that might look like. So if that's what you're going for, then have fun with that, because it looks pretty cool. And then with Sparkle, I would agree for the most part that Vixen said that the E1 in his opinion, has more value. And I can agree with that for the most part. I just think one thing I think about is that a defense shred, and I'm going to say this mainly because I know someone will if we don't say it, right? Because honestly, at the end of the day, I think both of these Eidolons on Sparkle, her E1 and her E2, have pretty neck and neck or equal value. But I know someone's going to say it. The E2 is a defense shred, so it has to be better than an attack buff on the E1, as well as just lasting longer. Someone's going to say that because, yeah, it's a little bit more universal, whereas attack is gated to only attack scalars. But like Vixen also stated earlier in the video, in a different section even, most of the characters, at least that are damage dealers, all of them, except for just Blade, are focused on attack or something else like break effect. But even then, Firefly, we know, uses attack on top of that. And Blade even does use attack. He just also dual scales, throwing the HP on top of it. So even a character like Blade is actually getting use out of Sparkle's E1. And I don't think you can argue that. It's kind of just objective. We know he scales on attack and his HP. In general, though, while I think both of these Eidolons are pretty neck and neck, like Vixen already stated, you can just stick at E0 because Sparkle at E0 is already going to tremendously upgrade your account pretty much any and all teams that you have, just because Harmony characters tend to be that way. But if you are thinking about an Eidolon, I think the E1 is pretty dang good, making that ultimate last a little bit longer, and you can kind of not stress so much about having to get her ultimate off every 2 turns. Now you can just know that it's lasting for 3 turns, and that's just kind of a quality of life feeling for her.
We hope that this video could help you decide on whether these characters or Lightcones coming on the next banner are for you. As always, if you have any suggestions that may help other players, go ahead and let us know down in the comments. Make sure to like, subscribe, and check out our Discord as well. Thank you again for watching the video, and we'll see you guys in the next one.